You're listening to Rebel Hearts Rising, where we believe your darkest hour holds the key to awakening depth and profound inner wisdom. I'm Tam Burke, and I created this to remind you that when your heart wants to shut down, that's your call to rise, like a phoenix from the ashes. What makes this unique is that every episode is paired with a guided meditation to help awaken your intuition and heal on deeper layers. Together, we'll turn pain into power. What's up, y'all? Welcome to Rebel Hearts Rising. My name is Tam. I'm your host, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. Today, we're going to talk about current events and how, even though there are heartbreaking things that are constantly happening in life, this is still one of the best times to be alive. And how important it is that we really monitor our thoughts about what's happening, because our thoughts ultimately create the life that we live. And so right now, in the time that I'm recording this, Texas just experienced a devastating flood. I can't even talk about the details because it brings so much sadness into my heart. China's going through landslides and epic weather, and, you know, the political climate, like there's so many things that we could list that you really have to be rebel-hearted to exist around. It can be really heartbreaking to watch what's happening to some of the world and still continue to want to move forward. And this is also why I think it's really important that we monitor our internal diet, like the things that we are taking in. And so that is news and podcasts and the way that people are talking about things, because our thoughts are the fundamental building blocks to the way that we experience the rest of our life. I really like to think about this as how we build a house. And the first thing that you do when you build a house is you build the foundation. You make sure that it's level, and then you build a basement. Or if you're not in a place that builds basements, you build a structural space and a crawl space, right? And so our thoughts affect every single part of our life, because ultimately our thoughts manifest into our feelings. And then our feelings create our beliefs. And over time, those beliefs create our actions. And sometimes you can circumnavigate all of these things, and our thoughts just definitively affect our actions. And from that place, our actions create the entirety of our life. And so if you find yourself consuming news and worrying, then what ends up happening is you start to dim your internal frequency. And you'll hear me talk about frequency a lot. I'm pretty much in love with this subject right now. In last week's podcast with Emily, if you haven't listened, it's like one of my favorite interviews yet. We talk a lot about how humans have different frequencies. And sometimes I think we can be really finite in the way that we look at frequencies, like, oh, higher frequency, better. And it's like, well, actually, there are also just different frequencies that are really beautiful. And the way that we talked about it in that podcast was like dead shows, right? People flock to dead shows. People also flock to fish shows. I love Grizz. Does that make my music choice wrong or their music choice better? No, they're simply just different frequencies. And so our frequency creates our entire life. And our frequency field, or what people call our aura, or quantum calls our biofield, is made up of our thoughts, our stories, our beliefs about ourselves, our identity. And so part of why I wanted to make this podcast is because I actually, for years, have been thinking about like, damn, I want one podcast episode that I can come back to time and time again when my mental state is off, and it can like realign my frequency essentially. And so something that I really like to differentiate between is mindset and also energetics. Our mind is wildly, epically powerful. We know this. And sometimes also we can get in a little bit of trouble when our mind is too powerful, because our rational mind comes online, and this can really block our intuitive capabilities. And I really want to differentiate between those two, because the rational mind only has access to what it has access to. But our intuitive capacities have access to all information through time and space. But often we can't access this more expanded way of being, because our rational mind comes in and says like, oh, that's not true, or you're too woo, or that's not real. And something that I find to be really important when we talk about frequency is to know that our intuitive capacities are also affected by our feelings. And our feelings are really affected by our thoughts. And so if you've ever worked in Excel, there's something called, I can't think of it, but essentially it says you're referencing too many of the same cells, and so the formula can't work. And that's actually exactly what's happening in our brains a lot of time, is if we have these repeating thoughts, if we're worrying about what's happening, we're creating a frequency that's affecting everything else in our life. And so this is where I really want to take a moment to break down how important it is that you address the mindset piece, but you also have the energetics behind it. And I want to give you a really tangible example so you can understand the difference between the two. Mindset is like having autonomy over the way that your mind is working, recognizing perhaps in real time when you're having thoughts that aren't serving you, and then being able to shift them into something that is serving you. But what I find the problem is, I'm using air quotes if you're not watching, is that when we orient really strongly to our mind, we forget that as humans, all of the magic happens in our body. And this is where we really talk about the word embodiment a lot on this podcast, because how often do you know something here? I talk with clients about this a lot, like worth. We might know that we're worthy, but when we embody worthiness, we move differently through life. And that's the difference between energetics, because energetics to me also combines the feeling capacity of it. And so it's almost like mindset is step one. But as you move into deeper evolutions of self, you start to realize it doesn't really matter if your mind is on board, if in your freaking bones, you also don't feel the same way. In last week's episode, Emily really encouraged, or not even encouraged, she invited people into The Secret. She said it was like the book that changed her life. And it's really strange. I had never read it, and it really talks about manifestation basics, like law of attraction basics. And one of the things that I found that was so profound that they talked about in there is essentially, it doesn't matter if you have all of the right mindset, if you are not feeling joyful, if you're not feeling happy, if you're not feeling grateful, like the highest frequencies that we emit off of our body. And I'm going to pause for a second. Those of you who might be a little nerdy, we know in the quantum that the energy that we can measure the most out of the human body comes from the heart. So we actually literally know in terms of frequency that our heart, these high emotional feelings, joy, gratitude, like bliss, right, actually is our human birthright. If we go into the koshas, which I won't go too deep into, but this is Indian philosophy around the layers that we have on our body, they actually say that our deepest layer is Anandamaya kosha, our bliss layer. And that actually bliss, joy, gratitude, is the state that we exist in naturally. And it is the effects of everything else that takes us away from that. It's like, I think we should almost pause for a second and really feel that. Your natural state is bliss. And anytime you're not feeling bliss, it's because of external influences. And that might even be what you're consuming, how it affects your mind, and then therefore how your mind affects your feelings, right? So we're going back to the kind of structural conditioning of how we build the house, of how we experience ourselves. And so it feels really important to me when everything is going on in the world. And to be honest, like today we're talking about floods and landslides, but you could play this probably at any point in time in history, and there would also be something to talk about. And so what this says is, I want to back up for a second because I also want to come to you guys with a question, something that I'm working through in my own internal world. We know that spiritual bypassing isn't really good for us. It's definitely not good for other people. And let's define spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is kind of applying a spiritual film on top of why really challenging things are happening without actually feeling the depth of it. So an example might be the floods that are going on. It's like, oh, well, whoever the floods affected, like they incarnated into this life to receive those lessons. And it's like, yeah, but also it freaking sucks. And if we don't feel the grief and the challenge and the heartbreak that goes along with those things, we're bypassing over the experience that's meant to be happening. And I actually do believe that everything happens for a reason, that there are lessons that we come into this world to accumulate. I believe that we pick our parents. I believe that we pick the greatest things that we challenge with in this life so that we can overcome it. And I also believe that we incarnated as humans to feel. One of the things that I study in spirituality is essentially we all came from like a big blue ball of light or one consciousness or God. And at some point we wanted to separate ourselves out to really experience life, to experience all of the feelings that come with it. And if you think about this, what kind of life would you want to incarnate to? They often say, like, what are some of your favorite movies to watch? Like, ooh, maybe a little spooky, maybe some comedy, maybe drama, maybe a rom-com, right? And so, like, we know that as humans, we love theater. We've been watching theater for as long as we know, entertainment. And so perhaps it is true, or it's just a theory, that we incarnated so that we could learn and experience all of these different things in life. And so if we spiritually bypass by simply just saying like, oh, well, it happened for a reason. Oh, well, these are the spiritual lessons that we're supposed to learn. I believe that we're not really like feeling and experiencing the fullness of what life has to offer. And this is like my spiritual self speaking, because the moment that hardship happens in my life, I'm like, no, why me? I don't want any more. Please no, right? As you guys know, I went through a few very challenging years, and it's what built this podcast. And I'm so grateful for those years. I'm so grateful for the woman that I grew into because of those things. I matured in a way that I really didn't even know was possible. I experienced depths and darknesses within myself that I oddly don't wish upon other people, and yet I'm so grateful for it. And I think it is that duality and actually maybe even the polarity of those experiences that come back to the question, how do we know that our thoughts create our frequency and our frequency attracts our like, that our frequency is a match for everything that we are experiencing, but yet we also can't spiritually bypass. And so that's something that, first of all, always, I love to hear from you guys. And so if you have questions or thoughts on this, like DM me, always love to chat. You can respond to my email too. But how do we feel our feelings? How do we feel the depth and also the breadth of the feelings? What we might call good and bad. I'm using air quotes because those are really finite terms and terms of the way that we can talk about emotion. But the rainbow of emotional experience, while also simultaneously not getting so trapped in those emotions that it highly affects our frequency and therefore starts to attract experiences that we don't like or experiences that don't match what we're looking towards. So I'll give you an example. As many of you know, my best friend took her life a few years ago, and I'm still waiting to make a podcast episode about that. I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you, but I'm not ready yet to share that story. I still need some more space. But in that experience, goddamn, y'all, I experienced grief. I experienced grief like I didn't even know possible. And one of the things that I heard along the way about grief is that the depth of our grief is only equal to how much we loved somebody. And so if we love very deeply, when we lose them, we can experience a large amount of grief. It's this idea of polarity, right? It's almost like the law of neutrality. To the degree of which we love people is the degree to which we will feel the loss when their physical form passes. And I think that's important to note because, shout out, I still have an amazing relationship with my girl in higher states of consciousness like meditation or channeling her. And I'm very grateful for those experiences. But again, that could be seen as a lens of spiritual bypassing because the truth of the matter is it sucks. I wish I could just call her. I wish that we could talk. And for a little while, I let myself get trapped in grief. I have an amazing therapist, and thankfully she sat me down at some point and said, like, we're at a turning point. You need to figure some shit out, right? The grief is affecting your life. And so how do we experience big things like the loss of the people we love most, heartbreaks like watching people be devastatedly affected by natural disaster, political climates? And the only thing that I've come up with so far is that we know emotion is energy in motion. And we also know that we get in trouble when these things get stuck. So what stuck energy looks like is when we don't feel our feelings. And so one of the things that I'm starting to come to is I think feelings are meant to be felt like toddlers. Like deep and intense, but short bursts. And then it's kind of like, oh, okay, starting to move on. And naturally, that will last differently lengths of time depending on the depth of what you're going through. And actually, I think that when we feel our feelings, when we also set a container to it, right? When we don't allow it to last for long periods of time or become, I think the key here is over-consuming, that actually raises our frequency. Because something I hear a lot from my clients is like, oh, I'm really concerned about, I feel down. I feel like I need rest. You know what I hear this often with is women when we're on our cycle. It's like, oh, well, I'm so low energy and I don't want to attract from this state. And I'm being hard on myself about being low energy. That dims our frequency. Experiencing grief, experiencing sadness, experiencing fullness of human emotion, I think that actually raises our frequency. Because one of the things that I'm starting to feel is that when we have the courage and the depth to be with ourselves and our feelings and not to torment ourselves through thought, and I think that's a really important distinguishing factor. Feel the feeling and move on. And one of the other aspects that this is bringing in is the power of the present moment. So we get into, again, I'm using air quotes, trouble when we don't exist in the present moment, which is like a majority of the time that we spend. We are either thinking about the past and all the things that we don't want to happen in the future, therefore actually projecting those things into the future, or we're worrying about the future, we're thinking about the future. And so to me, one of the best ways to move through heartbreak, challenge, things that are happening in life that just plain suck, is to be in the moment that you feel it, to be present with it, to not make yourself wrong for feeling it, to let yourself be with it, contain it in that current moment. And then when that current moment ends, when the feelings have felt like they've come, moving into the next current moment. Because actually, if we live in expanded states of consciousness, we're actually just moving from present moment to present moment. And so at some point, as the present moment shifts, so too do our feelings. The cry naturally comes to a resolution. We feel ready to move on into the next thing. Another desire comes up in our body. We're hungry, we're thirsty. And so we're moving into containment of the present moment. And so I want to bring this all back together for us. One of the things that I'm starting to recognize in myself, in my meditations, in my conversations with my spirit, in working with a bunch of clients, is that we must feel our feelings. It's key to everything. But we also need to recognize what is the causation of those feelings. And if there are thoughts that are happening that don't serve us, we need to become more aware of the thoughts that we're thinking. Here's an example. The floods, especially when I heard about, the details of them, heartbreaking. Okay. Feel that in the current moment. Even right now, I can feel tears welling up, like letting myself be with my freaking sadness. The heartbreak that people are going through, the devastation that it creates. And then from that space, allowing it to naturally dissipate and move on. Now, if every moment of every day I'm thinking about the floods, does that serve me? Does that serve the people who are affected by the floods? Does that contribute to humanity? And does that contribute to the frequency that I want to be in my life for myself and for other people? And so this is where I think it's really important to become militant or diligent about the way that we experience our thoughts, about the way that we recognize what's happening for us in real time, about the way that we become really aware. Let's give another example. So you notice yourself feeling just like really crummy and you're not sure what's happening, and it takes a while to kind of sparse out like, oh, the thought that I'm thinking that's associated with what I'm feeling is that I'm not worthy of being an entrepreneur. I'm not worthy of living the life that I want. Okay, great. Does that thought serve you? Is it true? What could be more true? And something that I like to think about when I do this is like, I get very serious. If we were in a court of law and there were 8 jurors and all 8 jurors had to vote yes on this thought that it's true, would they? Because most likely the answer is not all 8 of them are going to vote yes. And so that can kind of give this like really playful spin on looking at your thought from the viewpoint of other people. Like in a court case, could you prove it 100% true that I am not worthy of having a business and the life that I desire, and etc. And so when we realize, okay, that's definitely not true, then we get to start to shift our thoughts. And as we start to shift our thoughts, and this takes a lot of inner alchemy, which I define as transmuting one feeling into another to create a shift in our frequency. It can take a little bit of work and it can take a little bit of rub within that. But as we start to do that and we start to shift our feelings, we start to think about like, what's more true? Actually, I'm an incredible business owner. I've owned multiple businesses. Why would that be the case? Why would I not deserve a life that I desire? Why do other people have that, but it's not for me? And we start to really pick apart or pull apart the thread of this thought that we're having. And as we start to understand more and more about this specific thought that we're having, then we have the ability to start to shift our feelings about it. And what's very cool about this, and this is the mindset part, is that we get to examine what's happening. And if you're not watching, I call this like back of conscious. Like thoughts for me start in the back of my mind, and I'm almost not even aware that they're happening. And then as I spend more conscious time with myself, this is why I love meditation and think it's the single most powerful tool that exists for humans. Let's toss breath work in there too, meditation and breath work. Then we start to pull thoughts into what I call the middle mind. And the middle mind is where you start to recognize what's happening, but you can't really put words to it yet. And then as you spend more time in this mid-mind space, a thought starts to come into the front of mind. Front of mind means you can clearly label it in your mind. You are fully aware of the thought. And then the last step that I often experience is that then I have the words for it and it can come out of my mouth. And I've noticed that this is different for different people. Some people are external processors, which means, why I also love this podcast, as I talk, I actually start to make more sense of what's happening to me. It's like the thoughts are flowing through, and as they move to my mouth, I'm able to move the energy into recognizing the thoughts that I'm having. I'm like connecting dots. Some people are internal processors, meaning this entire thing happens, and they don't actually need to have it flow out of their mouth. Now, I like to put a caveat with there because my man is a total internal processor. Your girl, total external processor. And I've had a lot of clients who are internal processors too, and there's still something so wildly profound about when we vocalize what's happening in our head. It's almost like, you know, when you crack a soda and it's like, and all the pressure releases. I often find that by naming things out loud to others, we are also able to more deeply witness ourselves as it becomes separate from self. Does that make sense? When it's in the internal system and we haven't yet put it in our physical world, we don't have the ability to witness it as well as when it comes outside of us. External processors need more of this, internal processors need less, but I believe that it's really powerful and potent for all of us to say these things out loud. I think that's why coaching and therapy and talking to our friends is such a powerful frequency shifter, because we have the ability to witness ourselves. And so, what you just heard me talk about was mindset. Now the energetics is the work, the alchemy that we do behind it around letting these truths land in our body, shifting our feelings to be more in alignment with how we want to vibrate, how we want to emit a frequency. And coming back to, it's really important. It's so important that one of the things that you take away from this is having intense feelings does not lower your frequency. Making yourself wrong about your intense feelings, super frequency lower. Continually thinking thoughts that do not serve you, almost to a point where it's like self-sabotage or self-punishment, like repeatedly ruminating about floods, repeatedly ruminating about the political climate, repeatedly ruminating about any drama that's going on in your life. Like, that shit does not serve you. And so this is where I think energetics and mindset are really powerful to marry together, because we have to create the ability to know what's happening in our mind, to have the courage to be honest about the fact that, have y'all read the book Existential Kink? Highly recommend. And so this phrase is from that. There's this idea in the book that essentially we are kinky little minxes, and we kind of like to punish ourselves sometimes. We like almost get off on the idea of being a victim. And so within this, don't trigger yourself with those thoughts. Highly recommend reading the book. Within this, we start to notice like, oh, wait a second. Do I like to ruminate about the political climate because some part of me feels better when my frequency is lower, because I grew up and my frequency was low in that household, because I don't believe that I'm worthy of a happy life, and so this is a covert way for me to kind of dim my environment by repeatedly thinking thoughts that bring me down. Ooh, shit. Tell me if you're feeling called out, because even I feel called out too, right? How often do I create problems, ruminate on thoughts, and bring these things into reality because in some weird, kinky ass way, I'm trying to torture myself. And again, this isn't always conscious. Like, I'm not thinking like, oh, let's think about everything sad that's going on in the world. But this is why I wanted to record this podcast episode, is because it's like, y'all, there's so much that's happening in our brains all the time. And when we become more aware of those things that are happening, we have the ability to create the life that we really want. We become life artists as we see the raw materials that we're working with. The alchemist knows the materials that are in his lab. He might not always know the way the experiment is going to happen, but that's the way that we live life and we get to play and understand. Because one of these things that I believe too is, if you're listening to this podcast, we have a similar frequency. The things that I say are helpful, the way that I talk about things. And I even believe that beyond the words that I speak, it's the resonant energy that you pick up on. And then we move into a similar frequency. And so all of this is to say, this is why I'm getting back to, I took a tiny break from adding meditations to all of my podcasts. We're coming back to that because I really believe that meditations create so much freaking space for us to witness all of these different things that we just talked about. I really love journaling too. That's why on my email list, you get the journal questions. So, a couple options for you. If you sign up for my email list, you have an ability to get an email every week when the podcast episode drops, and with customized journal questions based off of what we talked about in this. And then, as always, there is a meditation that is attached to this. You'll see it in the show notes. You can find it on my page as well. It's just below. And I just want to say thank you for being here with me, because I'm really creating Rebel Hearts Rising for you guys, but also for myself. In terms of the way we expand our frequency, making a commitment like this who I'm becoming as I create space to share what I experience in my internal world, to share the teachings that I do with my clients. I am just really grateful for y'all listening. And always, if you want me to riff on something, if you want a podcast episode on something, if you want to share what's going on for you, DM me. I love chatting about this. And also, if this resonated for you, if you felt called out during this, please share this with someone who you know that it could make an impact in their life too. As always, thanks for being here. I love being with you guys. If you're on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. And if you're on Spotify, you can follow to make sure that you get all of the notifications when new episodes are dropped. Thanks, y'all.